I have one question. Dr. Pranger had shown us a chart of the correlation between birth control and the divorce rate, both spiking up at the same time, and also the abortion rate following the same pattern. And Vicki, my question for you is, can you relate that, or can you relate the difference in that divorce rate and the divorce rate of those families who practice natural family planning, which of course is very low, I think it's less than 3% or something. Can you relate that to your biomedical physics, chemistry stuff?
I think so. First off, the difference in statistics between divorces of those using contraceptives and those using natural family planning, it's less than 3 to 5%, 50% in the population, depending on whose statistics you use. Really, if those were seatbelts, that would be mandatory. All right? I mean, it makes such a difference because of the discussion and the growth of the couple in openness to life. And, it's interesting because there are even scientific studies that link birth control to divorce. We don't know they're there, but there's articles out there linking that, which is fascinating when you think about it. But again, that question of we're not in the dance together, we're not perceiving each other as fertile, libido is crashed. I didn't speak about one of the pieces of research that's very interesting. Some years ago, a man by the name of Lionel Tiger, who's an anthropologist, and looks at men in particular, male systems, the whole 9 yards. He really believed the pill had a major effect on men, on chemical contraceptives, and so he took a colony of monkeys to an island, and the male was Austin. And this has been repeated, all right, but this is the first research. And Austin was absolutely faithful to 3 of the females. Those were his consorts. He paid no attention to the others. When they put those 3 on chemical contraceptives, he lost interest, and he took up with 3 others. When they put the entire community on chemical contraceptives, he lost interest in having intercourse. His sperm count dropped radically, and he began to masturbate excessively. When they took the females off, his sperm count came back, masturbation ceased, and he went back to his first 3 consorts to whom he was very faithful. So the impact on men in terms of the contraceptive issue is also very significant. But this question of living naturally in terms of being in sync with our bodies and with how they're designed to work, I think is made clear by what everybody's had to say today in terms of that. Oh, do you want to show you?
Yeah, I was going to say, you want to just knock it out since you got the mic?
Sure, why not? The question, what are the efforts of tubes tied and vasectomies? What does it do to your health attraction to one another? It's a really super good question. There is a post-tubal ligation syndrome that's not talked about but has been written about in terms of changing women's health issues after there's been a tubal ligation. There's still a lot that's not known about it, but there are several doctors who've written about it. What about vasectomies? Vasectomies are not benign. One of the things that happens is it sets off autoimmune diseases in men because in the male body, the sperm and the blood don't meet each other, all right, in a healthy body. The problem with sperm, it's not a problem, but it's one of the facts, is that they're covered with antigens. The point is that in my body as a woman, my autoimmune system reacts and makes the adaptation. Well, in the male body, when it meets the antibodies on the sperm, it sets off an autoimmune issue. And there are, again, several doctors writing about this. It's very significant. Men who have vasectomies may well develop very serious autoimmune disorders. And fixing it, repairing it doesn't stop it because it was the meeting of the sperm and the blood. And so those are things that we need to really talk about. Again, when you mess with Mother Nature, it's a non-forgiving system. And we need to, again, become more conscious of that. If you want a specific citation in that, you can see me. I can point you to a couple of books that are out there.
I've got 2 questions that have been assigned to me. One, because my name's on one of them. Smartphone apps for NFP. This is it's going to be an interesting response. I mean, first of all, yes, there are some apps that are out there. There's some basic fertility tracking apps that are out there, but they're really not. They're not really a whole lot better than, say, just a rhythm method. I mean, it's just basically based on what your cycle was and what days would be theoretically fertile and infertile. I know there's a Billings model app that I've used intermittently that can kind of take the place of Creighton charting. And Creighton Model Fertility System is actually coming out with an app. It's in beta testing currently, and as of the information I got last week, it should be out the first half of next year. Now the big thing with this is that app, you need to see somebody like Jamie to learn Creighton Model Fertility System. You can't just get the app and figure it out. I mean, if you're looking at achieving or avoiding a pregnancy, you need to learn the system. Because if you're just going off information we post today, yeah, you'll probably be better than a calendar rhythm method, but you're going to be in that rate of like the 2-day method or just some kind of an observation method. And you may avoid the days of most high fertility, but not all the days of fertility. And then, flipping that around, your success rates, if you're not working with a natural physician to achieve a pregnancy, aren't going to be tremendously higher than what that there would be as a baseline. So I just caution you a little bit about looking into an app for the phone without getting some instruction. In the Creighton Model System, they do a great job. You have the introductory session, which is a group session, just to introduce you to the basics, of which, we probably covered 85% of it today. But then you have individual follow-up sessions where you meet 8 times over the next year with your practitioner to really learn this down, to improve your confidence in the system, and also to make sure that you're learning it and using it as is appropriate, which leads right into the other question. Interesting question. Dr. Pranger, were all of your children planned? If you remember the time sequence, first thing I'll throw out there is, if you noticed, we got married and had our first child before we learned Creighton. So whether or not that first child was planned, I'll leave for another discussion, as she might be present in this room. Beyond that, the way that we use Creighton's system, you use the system as it's designed. If you use days of fertility, that's what we call achieving related use. So if you're using a day of fertility, it's not that every time you have an active intercourse on a day of fertility you're going to get pregnant, but you're probably going to get pregnant. And especially if you continue to use them. If you avoid those days, then you're looking at avoiding related use, and so you're choosing to avoid that pregnancy. So were my soon-to-be 12 children planned? We get to exempt the first one because we didn't know the Creighton model. Out of the other 11, I will admit we do have one of them that was conceived while we were using avoiding related use. Okay, so we had one of them we conceived on the very, very, very front end of a cycle. It would probably be considered a method-related pregnancy. However, while I was at the Institute last week, people asked me, "Oh, do you have your charts from back then? I'd like to see them." Yeah, we weren't really charting. We were paying attention charting. So there's a little bit of question in my mind of how accurately were we paying attention, but I do remember that my wife had evidence of mucus the very following morning, and that persisted until we found out that we were pregnant. And so ultimately, we do have one of them that we were avoiding, and we got pregnant. All of the other ones, we used a day of fertility that we were aware of, and I'm not going to say that we had intercourse 10 times to achieve 10 children, but those were days. So it depends upon what you define as planned. But yeah, I'd say we did have one that was a method-related pregnancy, which would be in that very small percentage. So 1 in 20 years and 1 out of 10 kids. But the other ones were, we chose to engage in achieving related behavior on a fertile day. So you call that a planned pregnancy. Exactly.
Can you explain how you collect and examine the mucus? That's a really good question. So when you use the restroom, typically we ask that clients or that women check before they use the restroom, go to the bathroom, and they check after. From front to back, good hygiene, people. And when you wipe, you'll notice a sensation of lubrication if you're in your fertile phase. So as you're approaching fertility and your estrogen is increasing in your body, you're going to start noticing more sensations that that kind of go along with estrogen and peak type mucus. So anyway, so there's lubrication. So there's the sensation we think about when we wipe. Are we dry? Are we lubricative? And then you look at the toilet paper and you see, is there something there? If it is, what does it stretch and what color is it? And all these things kind of go into how, I don't want to say how fertile we are, because mucus, if you have mucus, you're fertile. Sperm-related mucus, people, says Dr. Pranger. Yeah, so for 3 to 5 days, if you have mucus, that's a day of fertility. So you could have intercourse on a Monday, have mucus Monday through Friday, ovulate on Friday, and get pregnant from the act of intercourse on a Monday. because there's mucus. If you do not have mucus and you start having mucus Thursday, Friday, you ovulate Friday, you would not get pregnant from that active intercourse on a Monday because you didn't start any mucus pattern until that Thursday. Does that make sense? So that's how you collect and examine the mucus. You wipe before, you wipe after, and then again you ask yourself the sensation, you look at the toilet paper and you ask yourself the color and the consistency. And again, that's why you want to get trained by a practitioner. Creighton is very standardized, so that's how they collect data and information for continued research. And so if I'm meeting with somebody who said that they felt that they were lubricative and they had stretchy and cloudy mucus, I know that that means something similar as somebody else who says the same thing, because we're not left to our own devices. We learn the system when we learn to standardize terminology for it. So I hope that answers your question.
I apparently got stuck with all the hard questions. I don't know how I managed that, but okay, I'm gonna start with one of the easier ones. The question is, how does NFP help with postpartum depression? I'm gonna change NFP specifically to NAPRO technology just because there is a specific protocol for that. So in NAPRO technology, there is a whole protocol specifically for postpartum depression. And what they were finding more and more with Dr. Hilders and his research is that many women who develop postpartum depression, they're finding that that's very strongly linked to progesterone levels. So during a woman's pregnancy, the placenta is the main source of kicking out progesterone and helping that hormone to stay high. And so as soon as a woman delivers, boom, the placenta's gone and your progesterone levels tank. And so one of the main ways that we help treat postpartum depression is through giving a woman progesterone. For some women, it happens right away after birth. For some, it's not until 6 weeks later. I've had one lady actually who about 7 months after she delivered, all of a sudden just a very, very severe, deep, dark depression. And so we treated with progesterone and that helped things come up. Now the one caveat I will say is that progesterone is not a miracle drug. It doesn't fix everything. But for a lot of women, sometimes even just one dose of progesterone has been enough to bring their mood back up to a more stable point. So that's that one. All right. Please explain the process for passive reversal of the first dose of RU46, which is like in the morning after pill. And is there a local doctor to refer to? To my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but to my knowledge, there's not a specific process that's been outlined as far as NAPRO technology goes. Now, I do know there is a physician in Des Moines. His name is Dr. Greg McKernan, and he has done a lot of work with giving high-dose progesterone after a dose of RU46. And basically what it is it's injectable progesterone. It has to be given multiple times on a daily basis over the course of the next 2 weeks. And the idea is that it helps to hopefully override the negative effects from that RU46. It sounds like he's had great success. I have not specifically talked with him about it. To my knowledge, he's the only local-ish doctor that's doing it. Again, Dr. Greg McKernan in Des Moines. They've approached me as far as, if I would be willing to look into this. I am willing to look into it. The problem is that it has to be injectable progesterone, which is very, very difficult to get rapidly because it has to be from a compounded pharmacy and there's all sorts of loopholes and insurance snafus and stuff. So more an availability issue on that one.
Just-
Can I
Yes.
just clarify? I think
Yes.
you said RU486 is the morning after pill.
It's
Right.
It's
right.
the
Sorry,
suction pill.
I'm sorry, Mr.
I was
Prosto.
going to say, they alluded to that. Our education phases of medical consultants are EP1 and EP2, educational phase 1 and educational phase 2. They alluded to it last week while I was there, that there is a protocol. I mean, the problem is that, it's exactly like she described. It's high-dose progesterone trying to reverse the success rates. They don't have great data behind it. And that's why I punted the question to her, because she's done both. But we haven't covered that yet. I think any of us, I think either of us would be interested in doing it, but like she said. And I believe that there's a law that just changed because like the Pope Paul VI Institute, they keep the injectable progesterone in their building. And something that just changed in the last month is that federal law has changed that you can't keep a compounded medicine in your clinic for any extended period of time. And so that might make it even harder to be able to do that protocol. So there's a lot of complexity that goes into that. Our willingness to try something, absolutely. It's just a matter of what the data is behind it in terms of efficacy. And best way to treat it is don't take it. But obviously at that point, it's kind of that's a moot point.
All right, and then the final tough one. What do you tell a woman who needs to avoid pregnancy for severe medical conditions, cancer treatments, etc.? Doctors tend to strongly recommend birth control. True. So, I think it looks at, if it's I absolutely cannot become pregnant right now, okay, options. First of all, abstinence, okay. Second of all would be, based on where you are in your cycle, there's a higher or lower likelihood of actually becoming pregnant. So for example, earlier on, prior to having that development of mucus, probably more likely because, like Jamie was explaining, if you have intercourse before you've ovulated, you've got a number of days until you can possibly get pregnant, as opposed to afterwards. I've had 2 patients, one who has cerebral palsy, who's in a wheelchair, and her first pregnancy almost killed her. She had severe cardiomyopathy, heart problems, all this stuff, and she and her husband afterwards, they offered her that she could have a tubal ligation and hysterectomy. They believed so strongly in NAPRO technology that they said, nope, we believe in this method. We know that, that God will be able to lead us through whatever happens. We trust in this method, and they are still practicing that to this day. And in her case, they've told her absolutely unequivocally another pregnancy will kill you, and they've still chosen to use this method. And then I have another lady who was going through, she was 41 and diagnosed with severe, metastatic breast cancer. And so I had to go through chemo, radiation, all this stuff. Now, obviously, a lot of that, the hormones and chemicals from that killed off her cycles and all that stuff, but there was still a real concern right at the beginning. And the same thing with her. She said, you know what, it's fine, we're gonna still keep doing this, we trust in this method. And so, I think because of the efficacy of the methods, you can choose to be even more careful than what we just outlined with, okay, here's your white baby stickers, stay away from those days. And I think all of the practitioners are well versed in being able to help people avoid that if that needs to be the case. So I tell people there is never any reason to prescribe birth control for anything, even in those severe serious consequences. So.
And that's again, Dr. Hilger's Pope Paul VI Institute, when they look at this, they deal with this all the time. And if you look at the numbers, the efficacy rates of this plan, of Creighton model particularly, but some of these natural methods, compared to the birth control pill, birth control pill is not 100%. Tubal ligation is not 100%. In fact, if you have a tubal ligation done, most of the time a pregnancy that would result from that is going to be an ectopic pregnancy. So not only are you getting treatment for breast cancer, but now you have an ectopic pregnancy that could kill you on top of it. So it's a situation where it's a very real issue. But patients just need to be, they need to trust whatever they're using. And I think it's a lot more sensible to trust a natural method that has a very high success rate. So it really doesn't change anything. Like you said, our Daniel was the one that was a method-related pregnancy, and it was a pre-peak active intercourse that happened prior to a mucus cycle. And the timing must have just been perfect that we didn't notice it, and then but that's a very unusual circumstance, and the reality is it's not that the safety. We try not to use that terminology too much because it implies other things, but the reality is there's fertile days and there's infertile days. If you use infertile days, you're not going to get pregnant. If you use fertile days, you're going to get pregnant. So ultimately speaking, if you have a very serious reason to avoid, then you're not even going to think about using a fertile day. And you may even choose to say, I want to have verification that I've ovulated that cycle before we even try, just in case, and that's very fair.
And I don't speak as loud as you. The verification of ovulation can occur too. There's a progesterone family planning lab that can be taken. So if a couple is in serious need to avoid, say like a cancer situation, they would avoid intercourse pre-peak. They wouldn't have any intercourse pre-peak. And then 3 days after peak, she would get her blood drawn, send it to the institute. They would check her progesterone level. Based on the progesterone level, if she is ovulated, I think it's a 3 or above, but if it indicates that she's ovulated, then for a fact it's safe. Like no way, because the deal is too, is the woman charting correctly? So did she correctly identify her peak day? Is that really her peak day, or did she misunderstand an instruction? There's that whole user effectiveness issue too. So adding that to the component, or adding that to the situation of that anxiety, oh my gosh, if I get pregnant, I could die, then you just send your blood work in. And then they can get back to you and let you know if you have ovulated for a fact, then you are not going to become pregnant if you have intercourse. So that's an awesome extra, and I think it's only $15 a month. So it's nothing super bank breaking.
And we can also do those labs locally. It doesn't have to be sent to the institute anymore. So, yeah.
Okay, before I answer my questions, there's a distinction I think it's helpful to know, and that is that the distinction the church makes between biological laws and natural law. Biological law refers to how the biology of the human person works. How do the lungs function? How do the bones function? How does the reproductive part of the human person actually work? What is its mechanism? And the other members of the panel are well versed in this particular area. But the natural law refers to what was God's intention when He made the organ. Why did He make the bones? Why did He make skin? What was His purpose in making the reproductive organs? And so the church is an expert in the human person, and we study and understand and have received divine or natural law in order to explain to people why God made the organs that He did. So I think that's a very important distinction to begin with. To change it is kind of the image I was thinking of earlier today, is if a couple moved into a house and you designed that house, you were the architect and you actually built the house, they moved into the house and they broke out the windows and disabled the locks on the doors. They would endanger themselves. In a day like this, they would be very cold. They would be violating by tampering with the way the house was designed. They would be harming themselves, putting their own security at risk, and violating the very purpose that the house has created. And I think the human body is somewhat like that. The first question is, Catholics, we often hear, well, NFP is birth control, so why is it moral and other methods are not? That is a very good question, and one that we hear sometimes. There is a difference between natural family planning and any form of birth control, and the difference is this. The natural family planning is fertility regulation that remains open to human life. In, I believe it's Article 14 of Humanae Vitae, Pope Paul VI said that every single act of intercourse engaged in by a married couple must be open to the possibility of life. It cannot be closed off in any way. And to do so violates the moral law and the purpose of sexuality. Even though it is well known that not every act of intercourse leads to pregnancy, it must be open to pregnancy. Everything from the pill to IUDs to tubal ligations, the act itself is not open to that life. It is inherently closed off. And so there is a difference in the act itself. So the act the couple engage in must remain open to life. Now, you could say, is it moral to marry two 80-year-olds, even though they're not likely to have children? It still would be, because they can at least commit the act, engage in the conjugal act that normally leads to children. But because of their particular stage in life, they don't foresee being able to have any children. But the act they engage in is open, and that would make it different than any form of birth control. The second question, how can we spur the discussion on the dignity of the person so people will begin to see themselves, their patients, members of the opposite sex, as human persons deserving of respect instead of allowing objectification to dominate the pervasive mindset? I think contraception has certainly been part of this, but I think a short and simple answer is this. recognize that every human person is made in the image and likeness of God. That means we have reason and we have free will. Something that no other creature on earth has. We have the ability to plan our families and to freely do it. And I think if we see the image of God in one another and really begin to appreciate what that means, it will be easier to reject the temptation to objectify that person. I did want to comment on the question of divorce. There is a global campaign right now to increase access to contraception. The goal is 120 million more women would have access to it by the year 2020. And I think that will lead to a lot more harm around the world. But one study in particular, in Iran, at the time of the revolution in 1979, the Ayatollah wanted large families because his goal was to export the revolution. And so women had, at that point, had about, an average Iranian woman had about 8.1 children. Well, the divorce rate remained very low, but when President Rafsanjani took over in 1989, he began to institute a program of birth control for the whole country to bring the population down. And they did reduce it. Today it's only 1.8 children per family now. But the divorce rate has skyrocketed. In 2000, there were 50,000 divorces in Iran, a country that discourages divorce. Today, or in 2010, there were 150,000 divorces. The divorce rate went up 16.1% in 1 year, and the marriage rate went up only 1%. And so, they're struggling with that. In fact, they had a day they used to call Marriage Day. Today they're calling it No Divorce Day. And so it is a very serious issue. And in Senegal, a country of about 13 million people, 94% of which are Muslim, family planning advocates are trying to get them to change their ideas on family planning. And one advocate said, if it wasn't for religion, we would be able to sell contraception. So religion is certainly tied into, in the case of Catholicism and some parts of Christianity, and in many parts of Islam, religion is tied into this whole issue. So it is because of the way we were made and designed by God.
Any other questions from the group?
Recently with the Synod on the Family, have they discussed any actions in terms of this contraception availability? And furthermore, how can the laity take steps to also better the situation?
No, there isn't going to be any change in that doctrine. Sometimes people refer to these things as policies that can change. A similar thing with women's ordination. They're not policies. The church's teaching on contraception, the church's teaching on women's ordination, it's not a policy that can change. We see that in the government. New government comes in, and now policies change. It is not a policy. It is a doctrine. I haven't heard any discussion about that, but the only thing that they could really discuss is how we could promote natural means of family planning and help to decrease the divorce rate. I'm not sure I understood the second part of your question, though.
I guess with a lack of formal education on the subject, or a lack of ordination or a voice from that aspect, how can we as young laity help to better the situation in our situations?
I think by encouraging people, especially younger couples, as I do, well, I require them actually, but to go and see a person like Jamie and for technology, natural family planning, to increase the number of young couples who take this, who get exposed to it. The pill, she'd been on the pill for many, many years, and she just got married, and she feels very blessed to be able to talk to Jamie and learn about this, and she feels that knowledge was deprived. She was never given that, and she's hoping that she will be able to have children. And so I think encouraging, especially those who are going to get married, to look into and to seriously pursue natural family planning will be a step in the right direction. And to discourage any use of contraception. I too believe, like the panel, I don't think there's any justification under any circumstance for the use of the pill or contraception. I do not see, even if it, in these situations that they talk about where it's medicine, I do not see how that can ever be morally justified.
I think the other thing is for you as young Catholics, to be familiar with the sort of thing I talked about so that you can talk to your friends without getting engaged in the moral question because of that, what I alluded to earlier in terms of the brain. If I'm stressed when I'm young, I can't hear moral. I can hear survival. What we're all talking about is survival. As men and women, do you want your partner to run the risk of getting blood clots? This question of partner choice, brain, that's big stuff, okay? It's all on the internet. You guys can talk about it and say, well, go look it up. You know, here's an article. It's hard to argue with that, okay? It's not like it was even 20 years ago where we didn't have access to that sort of material. You know, you'd have to find a medical journal, you'd have to know what you were looking for. It was the old-fashioned look it up sort of stuff. Now, you can find this stuff. And to be willing to speak about it, also to be willing to live it, to talk about the grace of marriage, the grace of love, that we are truly meant to be with this one partner and that all the pieces that come with that. Also to talk about the wonder of life. You know, God doesn't sleep when a baby's conceived, and I don't care what the circumstances are. You know, yeah, I might have made a mistake, you know, I was having sex outside of marriage, but who is that child? God wanted that baby here, God nodded. And so we, as people who promote life, have to share that with other people. You know, the sadness that comes when someone says, oh, this is a bad time, and then later you talk to the parents of the kids who were pregnant, and they go, oh, that was my only grandchild. I don't know if I'll ever have another one. We're called to be present in those moments. And I'm not saying we say, oh, have a nice life, sorry you're pregnant. No, we're called to be present and to help her and to find new ways to be of assistance. In the state of Washington now, they're instituting a new statewide initiative. Not sure what all is involved, but it's called Prepares. And it's pregnancy and parenting. And it's offering support to parents until age 5, but in lots of ways, because one of the things that we get, you know, as in the pro-life community, oh, you're only worried about the baby, you're not taking care of the mother, and what happens once a kid is born, blah, blah, blah. This is designed to answer that question, to be creative, to be outside the box, to think about ways that we can be there and to be of assistance.
In one word, I would say witness. We were at EP1 last week, and there's 82 or 83 students that were there. It's 30-some doctors, and the rest are practitioners or whatnot. But out of those 80, there were probably 20 people from Texas. And Texas is a big state, but there were 20 people from Texas. We were talking about that. We're like, what's going on in Texas? There's so many people. It's a word of mouth thing. You know, we had 4 of us from Iowa, myself and then 3 other practitioners. But a lot of the practitioners would come and they're like, well, I'm here and we don't have a medical consultant in our area. We only have one other practitioner in the area. Well, how did you find about it? Because we have a practitioner in the area. And it's something that ultimately, you know, the analogy I was giving, it's like a virus. You know, you have a virus that spreads from person to person and from state to state. And when you look at the map at the Institute, where it shows where all the practitioners are trained from, you know, it's not the population epicenters of the country that are highly represented. It's epicenters where there was somebody who got trained 20 years ago. And now it's really spread, and Texas is one of those states. There's pins all over in the state of Texas. You know, so it's something that it's a word of mouth. It's the more you know, the more you experience, the more you witness to other people. That is what allows this thing to grow. And whether it's a Creighton model fertility care or whether it's just understanding of what the pill does and the negative side effects and the more natural means that are available.
Being the middle of 5 kids, I'd say I'm probably the only, me and my sister maybe are the only one that like have a faith kind of compass. And something that one of my brothers, who does not believe in God, said as I was preparing for this presentation last March, because this is, Dubuque County Right to Life is not Catholic. A lot of people here might be Catholic. I'm Catholic. We're in a Catholic church, but many of you might not be Catholic or Christian. But the truth is that, again, our uterus doesn't have a religion. And my brother, when he was kind of sharing all this with me, he says, do not mention the Pope. Do not say God. Do not say any of those things, because the moment you do, people are going to shut your ears off. So here we're in a good environment because your ears are probably open. But in terms of spreading this, unfortunately, today there are a lot of people who don't believe in God. Maybe there is millions of things, anger in that person's life. So the way that I feel that we can evangelize is just literally by telling the truth about our body, because we are made in the image and likeness of God, and you cannot ignore that fact if you think about it too long. No matter what you believe, you can't ignore it, that things just kind of all happen and line up in lots of ways, in terms of our human body, in terms of our marriage, in terms of fertility. You can't help but escape that reality. It's just the truth. So I feel like a way to evangelize, or a way as young people to spread the word is kind of like Vicki was saying, like just tell them the truth. Tell them about a research study. I mean, if you feel called to talk about God, cool, but sometimes it can be damaging because that whole notion of whatever they connect that to, nothing with you, something that they're connecting it in their mind, shuts them off completely to what you're saying. So come at it from an angle. Pope Paul VI, Dr. Childers always says, Jesus fed the crowd before he spoke. Feed the people first and then speak, because otherwise you might just be clanging gongs sound. And so anyway, so for young people, I would say that, especially today, like 20 years ago, probably different. Today, I think that's the way you could come at them. Someone had a question?
Just one other thing. There's something happening in the secular community right now that's very interesting. And in about the past maybe 5 years, there has been a growing movement in women about the pill not being good for them. And there are several books out there, and there are several centers that teach fertility awareness methods, which is this stuff, all right? But not with any faith affiliation, 3,000 miles removed. There's a book called Sweetening the Pill that came out about, maybe a year and a half ago, written by a young woman whose experience of the pill was a negative thing for her. She's got a Facebook page. There's a lot of people following, and they're people who just, their own gut is that something's askew here. And in a sense, that's really exciting, because we're not fighting the big waves anymore. There's this sort of movement out there that's coming to meet us, saying, gee, pill hasn't been good for me. What do you guys know? And that's an openness, again, to you, in terms of people talking about, the pill made me feel really rotten. Well, let me, there are consequences, here's side effects that maybe you should know about. You can come at it in terms of that way. And there's lots of, again, material you guys can get off the internet or whatever.
I have a quick question. What did you say that book was called?
Sweetening the Pill.
There's going to be a documentary made on that book.
Yes, supposedly, yeah, I heard that.
A Made to Birth, or there's a midwifery documentary, Ricky Lake, what's it called? Business of Being Born.
Business of Being Born.
Have you guys heard of Business of Being Born? Anyway, it's Ricky Lake, the talk show host lady. She is putting together this documentary based on Sweetening the Pill, which is that book that Vicki mentioned. So it's just the truths of, I think, pharmaceutical company in terms of birth control. And I have a question for Dr. Pranger, and you can answer the thing. And then, Dr. Pranger, do doctors get incentivized by pushing a certain type of medication on a client? Is there an incentive?
Not really.
No?
I mean, it's, pharmaceutical companies, they have a part of their business is marketing, but there's been a lot of restrictions that have come on that over the years. I mean, you used to be able to get pens that had logos on it and stuff. They come to promote their product, and I mean, if you're a reasonable physician, you'll hear what they have to say, and then you're going to go do what's best for your patient. And so, I mean, there isn't anything, you could make a stretch. I mean, in today's world, it's like, well, if you write more prescriptions for this drug, that drug rep may come visit you more often and bring you free food. I think most of us would argue that, well, the food isn't free because you have to give your time to spend your time with them, and sometimes that time isn't worthwhile. But there's no direct incentives by any means.
There's another angle is with our Protestant evangelical friends being so devoted to reading the scripture. There's a book called The Bible and Birth Control that makes a strong argument, biblical argument against birth control. If you look at the totality of the scripture, and that's the way the church looks at it, not isolated verses, but the scripture speaks in favor of fertility. Genesis 4:1, perfect example. Adam and Eve conceive Cain, and she says, I have produced a man with the help of the Lord. An ancient recognition that God was involved in the reproductive process. In the book of Ruth, in the book of Maccabees, the references are also made to God being part of the reproductive process. And St. Paul encourages couples, for a spiritual reason, to refrain from relations with one another. Now, it isn't natural family planning as we understood it, but it was a sense that it is proper and appropriate for periods of time to restrain from sexual relations. And so I think a conversation with our Protestant and evangelical friends would be very fruitful, because there is much in the scripture in favor of what we're saying here. There's science and faith come together in a beautiful way, but I think by itself there is a strong biblical argument for NFP. And you have to twist the Bible into a pretzel in order to see any argument for abortion or contraception, because it simply is not there. Because for people in the Old and New Testament, large families were good, fertility was good, infertility was bad. And you could dismiss that as being cultural, but I think there is a divine and spiritual aspect that if we believe the Holy Spirit is the invisible author of Scripture, that cannot be ignored. And the other thing, I don't know if any of you saw the news recently about India, but some 13 women died a week or so ago at a sterilization clinic there because a chemical used in rat poison was somehow put into the pills that were given to women during these tubal ligations, and 13 of them died, and dozens of them were injured as well. And the doctor is now being investigated on charges, among other things, sterilizing 83 women in one day, which even their government says that's too many. So his comments about it just show a complete disregard for women and fertility, and I think that's what happens when you go down that road and engage in the practice that he and others do.
So this is a question. If a woman has PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome or polycystic ovarian disease, and she's not ovulating each cycle, are you able, or how are you able to tell with Creighton or Napro? And then does mucus change if ovulation doesn't occur? As a basis, the mucus is produced by the hormones that trigger ovulation. You can have a phenomenon which is called like a double peak in a cycle, where you have a buildup of that mucus, it comes to a peak day, and then it goes away. Then later on in the cycle, it builds up, comes to a peak day, and then goes away. You didn't ovulate twice during that cycle, you only ovulated with a second occurrence. A lot of the disorders of ovulation that naprotechnology is addressing is looking at things saying, well, why are we having some hormones produced? We have some mucus buildup, but there's other things about the cycle that are abnormal, such as the time from your peak day until your period is all over the board. In any given woman, that shouldn't vary by much more than about a day. So from the time of your peak day of your cycle, or the time of ovulation, till the time you start your period, maybe 12 days for you as an individual. Now there may be, your sister may be 15 days, but you're not going to be 12 one month and then 16 the next. Okay, that's abnormal, so we identify that using Creighton model. Some women with PCOS don't ovulate, don't have a mucus buildup at all. So it's possible that you're going along and you don't have a mucus buildup, you have some mucus here, some mucus there. Those are considered fertile days, even though they're not attributable to an ovulation event. But as that mucus builds up and peaks, yes, when it does, it usually falls off. Okay? That's the beauty of naprotechnology and the Creighton model system, is that regardless of what you do as an individual, it can adapt to that. We have some people that come in, I love it when we're in class and they're showing us, okay, so breastfeeding, when you're breastfeeding, you can have mucus like all the time, or you can have mucus none of the time. And it's, you think, golly, well, it should be one way or the other. Well, no, it can be all over the board. You can still use this to monitor your fertility and identify problems regardless of which pattern you're in. But people can be in any pattern. PCOS is much the same way. What you're doing with your mucus pattern could be all over the board, but absolutely you use it to monitor what's going on with the cycle. And if you do ovulate, you should see that buildup of mucus. Not always. When Jamie does the introductory sessions, there's one of the slides she puts up that I think is amazing, which is they have someone, they did hormone studies, and I believe they did even ultrasound studies to verify that they ovulated. Because that's really the only way you know that somebody ovulated when they ovulated, is looking every day with an ultrasound. The progesterone will go up afterwards, but it's like, well, it could have been 3 days ago, it could have been 4 days ago. But ultimately, they did hormone studies, and they proved that this person ovulated during the cycle, but she had no mucus. The day she ovulated, they had intercourse the day before and the day after, and they did not get pregnant because the mucus wasn't there. So hopefully that helps you understand. It's a very complicated issue as far as what you're going to see, but absolutely you can use Creighton, maybe it'll help with my cough, Creighton and NAPRO to identify whether or not you're fertile or presumably fertile, which would trigger with ovulation. And if that ovulation event occurs and you have a mucus cycle buildup, it absolutely will drop off. Anything you want to add?
I'd say the other piece that I would add to it is that we have had women who, generally one of the characteristics of polycystic ovaries is generally long and or irregular cycles on a month-to-month basis. We have found women who have normal appearing cycles, okay, they're every 30 days have what looks like a good mucus pattern, and they can't figure out they can't get pregnant and what's the issue. And it turns out then when we do the hormone workup, that's when we see that the hormone levels are off, which is still consistent with polycystic ovarian syndrome. And so I think it's one of those, it unfortunately has become kind of a wastebasket syndrome for a lot of problems, and they say, oh, you have cysts on your ovaries, therefore you have PCOS. And as Vicki pointed out, no, there's so much of that we don't even really know. And so I think that's the other piece of it, is not only the mucus observations, but also the laboratory evaluation and the hormone workup to evaluate, are there some abnormalities that may be consistent with the PCOS also. So we find that a lot with, actually, I would say probably the majority of my infertility patients we've found have some degree of PCOS, even with normal cycles. So that's most of what I end up treating with infertility is PCOS.
Another question and a couple things I just want to add. The question is, Vicki, how does technology affect fertility? Internet, phones, computers, if at all? Absolutely. Men should not carry cell phones in their pockets. The radiation damages the sperm. It's well researched. Should not work with. This is where you all remove that. In some cases, apparently does not count. I'm going to tell the guys now when I say this, but there's one way I know.
She said cell phones. It's an iPhone.
No, it's different. No, it's not. But we need to tell young men this in particular, and not to work with computers on your lap for the same reason. The radiation damages sperm. The question about women, they're beginning to wonder also if we too have some of this in terms, again, we're carrying phones, using iPads, okay, in this region of our body. There's a book that came out just recently called Electronic Spring. Written by someone who's really researched this, someone who knew some people who were really having very negative health effects from not only those sorts of radiation things, but the cell towers and other things, and some people get really sick from this, and nobody's identified it. So there's still much we don't know, but we should err on the side of caution, okay? You can get the phone protectors that have that protect you from the radiation. Make a point of not necessarily carrying them like directly on your body, in our purse, in something else, because we need to be conscious of this stuff, and there's so much we don't know yet. This is all such new stuff. Even as we talk about digital natives, I don't think they're digital natives, they're digital pioneers. They don't know where the swamp is, they don't know where the quicksand is yet. This is all stuff we're discovering because it's all changed so radically, okay? The other thing is that we need to be conscious, the question came up about the pharmaceutical companies. Those pharmaceutical companies have got bazillions of dollars, and they are doing their best to make sure that when there is a serious question of problems with their products, that it's dismissed. In Wisconsin, in the past well, there's two stories running. One recently, this girl died the same day she had a Gardasil infection. Okay, just, her mother went to the store, she was a little sleepy, came home, she was dead on the floor. No, this has nothing to do with Gardasil. Another case that's running right now, again, Wisconsin, two sisters, both of whom were left with premature ovarian failure. 19 and 20, after the Gardasil shot. Oh no, this is not related to Gardasil. You know, you look at the ads that are out there, I'm going to be writing an article about the ads that are appearing in People magazine about once a month on major pharmaceutical stuff. And why we should also take care of giving our sons Gardasil. Because it protects against anal cancer. Do you know how you get anal cancer? Yeah, there's only one way.
Cancer.
Okay. Yeah,
It's also oral.
it's also oral. Yeah, exactly. But that's the ad is that.
I've gotten a steal.
Yeah, so this question of what are we really promoting here in terms of saying, well, save your 12-year-old son from anal cancer? This sort of overlay of money, all right? There's some serious questions about some other of the injections that have been causing infertility in other countries. Oh no, it's not related. These are just spontaneous epidemics of infertility in a community where they came in and gave some sort of shot. We have to be smart about this. And you know, Gardasil, we have no long-term studies. And many of the Gardasil reactions are neurological. And I'm predicting that in about 10 to 15 years, we're going to see lots of women with neurological disorders that we're, where did those all come from? Because there's no long-term, we haven't done the long-term research on this stuff. Oh, of course it's good because we said it's good. But we have to be careful that those pharmaceutical companies will do everything in their power to protect themselves. There's something like 51 cases and much money that's already been paid out in terms of Gardasil. There's another 50 cases that are in process and like 83 more sitting there. And there's probably more than that, but that's what's officially labeled. We don't know. You know, we've been messing with the human body from the beginning in terms of the pill. If any of you are interested in the history of this, by the way, there's a new book called The History of the Pill by a man by the name of E.I.G. It's the history of Margaret Sanger and of Catherine McCormick, of Pincus and Rock, the four major characters here. Just written historically. He's a very good writer. But clearly appalled by the lack of research that we really did. You know, we went to Puerto Rico and said this to the women, and then there were some women who were sort of encouraged to do this or they wouldn't get their degree in college. But a handful, relatively speaking, and no long-term stuff, okay? And it was initially to cure some of those health things. And it said, and oh, by the way, it'll keep you from getting pregnant. Okay, but we need to be informed so that we can talk about these things. You know, back to your question. We have to be able to say, here's the history.
What was the name of that documentary that was on that book, Sweetening the Pill?
I think the documentary I believe will be called Sweetening the Pill.
I think so.
But this is all new, I'd say within the last year. So it's not been released. I don't even know if it's finished.
I don't
Yeah,
know,
I
if
don't
they're
know.
working on it. I
Yeah.
don't know if it's released.
But you mentioned it in terms
Oh,
of
the other
the
Ricky
Ricky
Lake.
Lake.
The one
Yeah.
The business of being born. The business of being born, yeah. Thankfully in Iowa, we have great doctors, but I feel like once you get out onto the coast, it's all about time. Like, let's have your baby by 6 because I need to get supper in the oven by 6:30, that whole idea. So like having it, you know, like inducing your labor to start at week 32 because you don't want to get heavy, that whole idea, it's interesting.
I don't know. I can't tell you. I've been in correspondence with her. I can't remember her last name. The other thing we have to recognize that you just raised here is that, you know, birth as God intended it creates all sorts of things that happen that we don't think about. So for instance, children who are born vaginally are getting the bacteria of their mothers, which is colonizing the gut, or which is colonizing the gut. The ongoing new research on the fact that if I'm a cesarean, some of the stuff I'm getting is actually from the hospital. Look at the epidemics of gut problems we have, you know, people who are allergic to various things, all this sort of thing. Question mark, all right? How do we colonize? Now we know the placenta does pass some of this bacteria in the biome, but there's stuff that's supposed to be happening here that we're missing, okay? You know, the question of breast milk and the fact that one of the major components of breast milk early on is 800 kinds of bacteria that we've never identified before. The purpose to colonize our gut with the family bacteria, okay? That's how it's supposed to work. And then there's all these long-chain sugars, this is fairly new research, long-chain sugars in there that they thought were to feed the baby, but what they discovered is that the long-chain sugars feed the good bacteria and kill the bad bacteria. Well, how awesome is that? But again, we interfere, you know, well, we don't want to go full term or we should hurry. There's ongoing research even in terms of some of the questions about Pitocin being used and whether in fact that might be creating or at least linked to some cases of autism. Because of what it's doing to the brain, it's an artificial oxytocin, it's not allowing our natural oxytocin receptor sites to be stimulated in labor, which is what's supposed to happen. Many questions because we keep fiddling with the system and trying to improve it or make it more effective.
I'm just gonna throw in there that, you know, keep in mind, a lot of these things are doing a ton of good. So it's not like it's, you know, God, we shouldn't give Pitocin to anybody, or should never do a C-section. Clearly, these things are needed. But I think if you take everything in the context of everything in moderation and, you know, just try to let the system work itself out the best way. I mean, I think that's what we're getting at or promoting.
And I think it's important for us as women to talk about our good birth experiences. Because we talk about the bad birth experiences to help create, you know, dispel our trauma, but we don't tell women about the good birth experiences. And so many women are terrified of birth because mothers say things like, I almost died when I had you. Okay, I've talked to these women, all right? That stays with me, okay? And we don't hear the grace of the moment when it works, all right? And we need to share that with them, because if it works, why would we talk about it? I'm not traumatized, it worked, okay, we had these babies. But we need to talk about it because there's no counter knowledge. In the very old days, we as young women were involved in birthing. Women gave birth in a birthing hut with our women, our mothers, our aunts, and the little girls first got to stand outside and say, don't go in. Then they got to come in and see that it worked. If I know it works, it changes my body. If I'm afraid, my cortisol shuts down my oxytocin, which I need to have this birth happen. And now I'm in a loop of the non-progressing labor. And so I really encourage, you know, if you're somebody who's been blessed with a good birthing experience, please tell that to young women. They need to hear it.
Any more questions? Well, I think we owe these people a big round of applause. A wealth of information, and if you want to hear more, they will be having a panel discussion tonight at Loras College, open to the students or anyone else. You can spread the word among your friends if you want to make sure some people who weren't here today get there tonight. So it's at 7 o'clock at the Alumni Center.